Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Today I have a very special guest with me. The last time we spoke with this gentleman, we had talked about his travels around the world. And he has been traveling after he came back to India. He's been traveling inside India now quite a bit. And he's been going to places that are of most interest to probably a lot of us today, such as Karnataka. And in Karnataka, he was for some time in Manipal, and then for some time in Bangalore. I think he was part of a literary fest sort of thing there. And he's going to move on to other cities in the south. So please welcome Professor M D Nalapat. Professor Nalapat, welcome to the PGurus channel.
Thank you, Sri.
Professor Nalapat, a lot has happened in the last week or so since the time we spoke. I think we spoke around the 27th of April or 28th, something like 2 weeks ago. And since then, the GSTN organization has been reorganized now. The private ownership that was majority owned, like 51% was owned by private entities, has now been completely subsumed into the government. Now the new structure looks like center is going to have 50% and states combined is going to have 50%. Now, this is something that you and I and a few others have been writing for a long time about how the GSTN needs to be restructured this way. So we are very happy. We're thankful to Prime Minister Modi for listening to us and doing this. Professor Nalapat, how do you see this thing playing out in the next few weeks to come? For example, in this reorganization, I want to be asking you one specific question because this was our biggest concern, and that was that the GST collections were staying with two private banks, HDFC Bank and ICICI Bank specifically, and they were enjoying the float for several days before that money got disbursed to states. Now, will that status change now? How do you see this playing out, sir?
Well, to be frank with you, Sri, those individuals who recommended the previous structure of GSTN, my problem is that there has been very little accountability for the past by this government. A lot of the people who are active in this government are people who are active in the previous government and active, frankly, in wrong decisions, many of them in dishonest decisions, and they're now still active in this government. It's really incomprehensible as to why the Prime Minister has not taken an audit of what these people were doing in the past and make sure that those who are having a lot of responsibilities in the past for wrong decisions were not carried forward. As a result, you have this absurd thing about GSTN going private, and that too favoring two banks, both of whom have very large foreign ownership. I don't know what the people were thinking who sanctioned this, but those who sanctioned it, those who moved it up the decision chain, frankly, they need to be identified and held accountable. It's absolutely absurd. It's, in fact, if I may say so, it borders on the criminal.
Sir, in Babu parlance, you normally don't fire someone for, malfeasance, leave alone incompetence. Usually they are quote unquote transferred. And maybe that's what he is attempting to do in this case too. However, I do agree with your viewpoint that he should really take stock of who have been actively abetting this wrong approach. And at least since the GST in itself is reorganized, start with a clean slate. For instance, I think I want to blow my trumpet a little bit here. I had written a book called The Gist of GSTN, in which I had suggested that the GSTN architecture be embedded with blockchain technology for applications of the future. You just do it now. You don't have to worry about the applications today, but it will come. And so something like that. When you have hit a reset, perhaps the Prime Minister also should think about what he can do better once, you don't want to do the same mistake again, and you cannot have the same, a different result for the same set of players. I think that's what you're saying, right?
Look, Sri, look at Y2K, for example. When that situation occurred, globally, there was an effort to locate new internet companies, new software companies, and therefore have new solutions. What was done in the case of GSTN? You went to the behemoth of Infosys, and frankly, you put the whole thing in their lap. Now, the fact is, you could have, there are thousands of brilliant minds in India who can set up hundreds of Infosys and other companies like that. But what happened? The government plonked entirely for a company that has been around, established, and frankly seems to be entering a stage of creative burnout. So this is the kind of the problem that we are seeing. The tired minds, the burnout minds are still active and they're giving solutions. Now the difficulty is, how does the Prime Minister convince the people of India to believe in him when he says, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, when he's got a team like this? And over the last 4 years, frankly, the achievement has not been particularly spectacular. So you needed to have a change in the team from day one, instead of which he's continued the team up to this period. So the result is today when he says, look, trust me, I'm going to make the change. This is not 2014, it's 2018. And fewer people, frankly, are trusting him to make the change because he has not changed the fundamental administrative personnel structure of his government.
Now, you see, we can't probably change the software vendor now. However, you can make it more democratic in that whatever new projects that come along, those should have a fair and transparent process of selection so that other newer players can enter the field and not just have Infosys. And doing this will have a very active ecosystem. I think that's what you are meaning.
Precisely. And again, let me go add on to say, for example, that take the question of creation of apps. Why is it that it's easier to create an app where you are in San Jose than when I am in Bangalore? Because of the oppressive load of taxation, of regulation, and frankly, a corrupt bureaucracy. These things absolutely smother innovation, they smother enterprise, they smother initiative. And these are things that need to change. The reality is the minds here are as fresh and as wonderful as any of the minds you can see in Silicon Valley. But why is it that they're not able to perform? Because the system around them does not give them a chance to perform. Now, the expectation in 2014 was Prime Minister Modi will ensure a change in that system. He talked of minimum government. And today what's happening, everything is being sought to be done through government. So I'm afraid I'd like to tell you that, in these 4 years, he has frankly, there's a very serious situation regarding his ability to do what he himself wants to do. And the reason for that is he has chosen, the same old wine and put it in a bottle where the new label is Narendra Modi and not Vajpayee. The wine is the same. It's Vajpayee wine, partly Manmohan Singh wine. The label is Narendra Modi.
That's a very interesting way of putting it. So let's say GSTN is now reset. The finance secretary is also seems to have gone to a different thing now. There's somebody else looking over at the GSTN and finance as a department. I also hear that an expert who has been working on GST is now going to be overseeing the operation in the center. Some small steps are being taken. However, what they could do, GSTN could do, is maybe share some of these changes, how they are going to go about resetting some of these things. I do hear some good things, by the way, Professor Nalapat. The GSTN refunds, the refunds was a big sore point for exporters. It was taking a long time for the refunds to come back. The period that it took from the time they filed to the time they got the refunds back has now shrunk a little bit. It could be better, but it is shrinking. That's a welcome step. However, I still don't know how much robustness the GSTN app is. For example, at the end of the month when everybody's filing, it is still crashing. I don't know. So anyway, these are specifics. Let's hope for the best that Professor Nalapat, that there is a change of approach also, not just change of the bottle. So Professor Nalapat, if you don't mind, I'd like to move on to the upcoming Karnataka elections. You have been going to different parts of Karnataka. You were on the west coast in Manipal, and I don't know what other places. You're also in Bangalore now. So how do you read the ground situation in Karnataka, sir?
Well, I'd like to say very clearly that the one thing going for the BJP and Prime Minister Modi is the fact that because of Modi, there's been a transformational change in the chemistry of the Indian Republic. India is probably the only country in the world, the only democracy in the world, where you had a minority consciousness in the majority. And that the reason for that was you had this Nehruvian secularism, where frankly, communalism was entirely front loaded onto certain communities. And the other communities were supposed to say that this is secularism. The more communal other communities become, the more you have the majority community has to say secular. And frankly, a lot of discriminatory laws and practices were put in place against the majority community. Let's say, for example, the British era situation of temples being taken over. The Mughals destroyed temples. The British did not destroy temples. They simply destroyed the income of the temples by taking away the land and by taking them into the control of government. After 71 years and 4 years of this government, there is no attempt has been made to free temples from state control. If churches and mosques should not be in state control, I fully say that they should not be in state control. Why should temples be in state control? Look at the Right to Education Act. The reason why for this Lingayat agitation, the Lingayats are a very productive people who want to set up commercial, engineering, medical, and other institutions. If they set it up, then automatically you have this Right to Education Act coming in and 25% quota being set. Whereas if you come from a Christian background or a Muslim background, there's no such problem. Now, why? Why don't you equalize the scales where whoever sets it up, whether it's a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian, there should be no problem. This vicious kind of communalism, which is called secularism or Nehruvian secularism, we expected that to be lowered, to be lessened, to be diluted. It's not happened. Nothing really practical has happened. But the good news is that today there is a consciousness among the majority community that it is a majority community. And I think it's important to understand that, when Prime Minister Modi came, that change has come. Tomorrow, even if Asaduddin Owaisi is Prime Minister of India, the majority is going to say that we are the majority. Now, by that, there should not be any kind of any problem for the minority. It should be equality of treatment to majority and minority. Take, for example, Sri 1951. Nehru introduced the Hindu Code Bill. Many practices in Hinduism that were abhorrent were removed. He could have done the same with the Muslim community, but he didn't do it. So whether it is the 1919 support that Mahatma Gandhi gave to this Khilafat movement, the Ali brothers, Wahhabis.
In hindsight, that was a big blunder. I'm sorry, I just interrupt. In hindsight, it was a big blunder.
Huge blunder, and that encouraged the kind of communalism which finally led to the partition of India. And that was embraced by Mahatma Gandhi. Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru refused to do any changes to certain practices of the Muslim community, like triple talaq, or, for example, more than one wife. Now, in America or in Europe, everybody goes and is allowed to have only one wife.
My dear Professor Nalapat, Pakistan has that rule.
Absolutely, but not in India. Because, for us, I would say communalism, is defined as secularism. Well, Kashmir, for example. Kashmir is the most secular country according to the secularists. The fact is, it's the most communal state in the Union. It is grossly communal and grossly discriminatory against a certain community. So this is the situation that we are, this Alice in Wonderland. I would have expected Modi to do a lot more practically. But anyway, symbolically, the fact of the matter is that there has been a change in the situation, and that symbolic change is now permanent. The majority consciousness of the majority community is there, and there's no doubt about it.
But I think that creating that majority consciousness is more attributable to Dr. Subramanian Swamy's talks, don't you think? Because he's been saying this for many, many years, even before BJP came to power. So I think there should be some credit to him for really creating that environment where they could easily see, yeah, the dice, is loaded against me.
Sri, you're talking to a person who, frankly, I used to write for Organizer, and several times Sonia Gandhi asked Vajpayee, please ask this the Organizer to stop this man from writing. And dear old Vajpayee, who is the best friend of Sonia Gandhi, used to go to the Organizer people and say, why did you allow this man to write? And frankly, he made Brajesh Mishra say some absurd things about me. At one time, Brajesh Mishra said that I was a CIA agent. Then 3-4 months later, when Organizer was still carrying my articles, the poor man forgot what he had said and said, I'm a KGB agent. So that really confused the Organizer. And then finally they decided if a man is versatile enough to be both KGB agent and CIA agent at the same time, then he's certainly, good enough to write for Organizer. Probably that's the reason why I was allowed to continue. So I'm talking as a person who has undergone a certain amount of, if I may say so, a certain amount of problems as a consequence of my stand on certain issues. Now, what is surprising is the very people who, whether it's Swami or whether it's myself or others, who were actually obstructing us, poo-pooing us, and trying to create problems for us, have all been empowered by Prime Minister Modi. I can't understand it. I mean, 70% of the reason why Modi is the Prime Minister is the negativity about Sonia Gandhi. And yes, some 3 or 4 people created that negativity, and she went all out after these 3 or 4 people. Luckily, she didn't succeed very far, thank God. But the reality is that the people who went after us on behalf of Sonia Gandhi, a lot of them have been empowered by Prime Minister Modi. I frankly cannot understand it.
It's a real grave travesty, and I think some of these things. I think people are also realizing that there are some things that need fixing inside BJP's own stable. But to a more important question, Professor Nalapat, how do you see this election? Who do you see is probably going to be forming the government?
1 year ago, it was a shoo-in for BJP, 140 seats, minimum 130. And then what do? They embrace Yediyurappa, they embrace the Reddy brothers. I mean, for heaven's sake, you're talking about fighting corruption all over the country. And then you embrace Mr. Yediyurappa. I mean, and then you're talking in terms of anti-incumbency. Now, what is happening is Siddaramaia's anti-incumbency is now pitted against the anti-incumbency of Yediyurappa. Now, between Yediyurappa and Siddaramaiah, quite frankly, there's no contest. Yediyurappa wins that particular contest hands down, in the sense that he has been a lot more resourceful in a certain way than Siddaramaiah. So as a consequence, what's happening is you have 2 anti-incumbencies fighting each other. And then you announce that he's going to be the chief minister for the full 5 years. There was some, talk in the BJP after 2019 he'll step down, but no, he's going to be for the full 5 years. You're handicapped yourself in that. The Reddy brothers have suffered a lot because of jail. Of some of them, some cases, there are still some honest officers who are trying to pursue evidence. And I mean, you had an excellent report by Santosh Hegde, which frankly is now just attracting dust. But there have been some efforts to basically enforce accountability, and they are today much weaker than they were 5 years ago as a result. Now, what if the BJP comes to power? They'll again be empowered. How? And then you're talking about fighting corruption. So very frankly, Sri, today I'd like to say the BJP is on the back foot because of its own mistakes, and this is a sad thing. Take an example of the list of candidates. I mean, I don't see too many women candidates. There are so many talented women who are in the BJP and who have, many of them have been on television screens. Many of them, I mean, have been. It's very clear they have the country's interest in mind. They have the party's interest in mind. They haven't been given tickets. Why? Possibly because 1 or 2 people, in the BJP who are close to the chief ministerial candidate, they don't like other women coming in the picture. So this is the kind of problem that's happening. The BJP is scoring self-goal after self-goal. The only asset they have is Narendra Modi. One man, the only asset. They have 99 handicaps and 1 asset.
That's an excellent way to put it. But I think with all these churn and everything, we have to see how this thing plays out. And Professor Nalapat, I think now I'd like you to wear your economist hat. Viewers, those of you who don't know this, Professor Nalapat was a gold medalist from University of Bombay in economics. Professor Nalapat, recent swing in oil prices. Oil prices are going up now. They just crossed $70 per barrel. The crude just crossed $70 per barrel. And the US interest rates are inching up slowly but surely. Now, this means that there could be pressure on the dollar versus rupee exchange ratio. And if that changes, if the rupee starts weakening against the dollar, then again, that is going to be an indirect price impact, and that could make prices to go up. What India was enjoying for 3-4 years of relatively extremely low crude prices, that honeymoon seems to be coming to an end. In your opinion, what do you think the government needs to do to redress this situation? You can't wait for it to go up and then react. You have to do it today.
Well, look, Sri, first point, I think what's happening is that this Trump administration is doing what the Bush administration did, which is fundamentally acting in a manner which pushes up oil prices. You remember under George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, both people who are very close to the oil industry, price of crude went up to about $148 a barrel, an intolerable price. And there's no accident that the economic collapse occurred during Bush and Cheney. Today, under President Trump, frankly, they're talking up the price of oil. They're talking in terms of confrontation with Iran. They're talking in terms of getting intervening in Syria. They're talking of very nasty way about Russia. And all this is now acting as a way of raising the price of oil. It could be because Saudi Arabia desperately needs a higher price. I mean, the Saudis are very profligate, so they need $80 a barrel or $75 a barrel. So it's an artificially high price. The fact of the matter is the world economy needs oil below $50. I would say $40 to $50 is a safe band for the world economy. Irresponsible talk by the US administration is pushing up that price to help one or two countries at the expense of the global economy. I'm not sure how long that's going to last. I think India needs to make it very clear. India is not going to step onto this, raise the price of oil bandwagon, raise geopolitical risks bandwagon, and, for example, say we should not join this kind of effort to demonize Iran. Iran, frankly, the nuclear deal is very good for the United States, for Israel, for all these countries. And if you drive Iran out of the nuclear deal, they're going to be a much deadlier foe than North Korea is today. So from all this point of view, I think India needs to stand up, raise its voice and say, look, enough of these geopolitical tensions. Let's be adults in the room. And this effort to raise the price of oil by artificially creating crises where none exist, I think that should be shown for what it is. And what should happen is that you should point President Trump in the direction of President Bush, who nearly caused the world economy to collapse because of the kind of policies, reckless policies that he pursued, as a consequence of which the price of oil went up, the price of commodities went up, and the economies of the world went down. So I think India is very clear on that. The problem, Sri, whether it is the current governor or Raghuram Rajan or frankly Reddy or Subbarao or Rangarajan, every one of them has been focused on pleasing Wall Street. And what does Wall Street want? It wants the rupee to be weak and the dollar to be strong, so that if you've got a dollar and a euro, you can come into India and buy Indian assets cheap. That's been the name of the game, and the Reserve Bank has been playing that game for decades. It's still playing that game. So the dollar is king, the euro is king, and the rupee has to be the servant of the dollar and the slave of the euro. So this is the kind of policies that even now is being played by the finance ministry and by North Bloc. It's playing a game which is designed to make the rupee the servant of the dollar and the euro, instead of being a currency in its own right, the way the Chinese have made the RMB. So I think we need a fundamental change in the thinking of North Bloc. And secondly, we need India to speak out very clearly about the kind of geopolitical risks that are being created in the Middle East because of what I may say so, extremely adventurous policies, push Cheney policies that very surprisingly are being pursued by President Trump.
Professor Nalapat, you make several interesting observations, and I want to just pick on a few of those. Number one, so far, Prime Minister Modi has rarely been criticizing any country's premier. He's been doing more of hugonomics, meaning like he would go and hug the guy, and somehow, on a personal level, he seems to be wanting to build relationships. I have rarely seen him criticize anyone on anything. So that's one data point for you. Whether he'll do it back channel negotiations, maybe that's how he believes in doing it. Let's leave it for one thing. Second thing is relations with Iran. India has been working on improving their Chabahar port, and that should in turn help India to formulate a deal with Iran whereby they can build Iran's infrastructure, aging infrastructure of refineries, in exchange for maybe crude at a price which is not determined by the dollar value, but by an between Iran's currency and India's currency, some sort of a barter deal. I don't know if that's possible or in the realm of things, but I think they should seriously think about that. The third thing I wanted to add to what you're saying is there's one slight difference between 2008 and 2018, and that is that US is now capable of becoming like, the pressure cooker's pressure valve, wherein it can step in and pump up production using shale. Of course, it ruins the environment, everything, but leave that thing aside for a moment. Shale petroleum production becomes profitable once the crude goes above $35. And I mean, at 60, 65, a lot more shale rigs will come online. So that is probably going to drive the price down because a lot more crude is going to be made available from the United States, which was not the case in 2008. So maybe that is going to be one pressure valve. Now, go ahead. Please go ahead.
I fully agree with you. And the fact of the matter is that this kind of an oil price is going to kill the oil sector in the Middle East, because people are going to shift on to solar. They're going to shift on to other kinds of energy, and the prices of solar are falling. The prices of alternative energies are falling. And hopefully you'll have a situation in which nuclear technologies also change. If you go in, for example, for thorium reactors, which in my view, India, United States, other countries should collaborate on thorium and ensure that we have thorium fuel reactors. Well, in that case, definitely in the long run, this is going to kill the oil producing countries. It's a very short-term fix. It's like an adrenaline fix. It's like, frankly, a narcotic fix, in which you take the narcotics, you go on to high, and then you crash. That's a fact. But what I'm saying is that it is completely irresponsible to try and talk up the price of oil the way we are seeing the US administration do. And I think, the Europeans understand that. The Asians understand that. All of us understand that. As how to tackle it, I would say very frankly, call the bluff. One difference between 2018 and 2008, frankly, the US economy is proportionally much smaller than it used to be in that period. So that is where the China opening comes in, for example. If India and China were to say, we are going to ignore these sanctions and we are going to react together, are US banks going to be able to ignore India and China together? I don't think so. The more countries we bring into our ambit, and the more countries we bring into basically calling the bluff of sanctions on the case of Iran, I think the better, because quite frankly, we don't need any more crises than we already have.
Well, Professor Nalapat, Trump tweeted, I think today, that he's going to make up his mind about the Iran deal tomorrow, and we'll see what comes out of that. And for viewers, I want to just leave one data point with you. If you look at the period of last 20 years, China, its renminbi was at 8 renminbi to $1 20 years ago, and today it has appreciated to 6.7. 20 years ago, India's rupee was around 42 or 43, and today we are at 66. So we have actually depreciated by 50%. One has appreciated by close to 25%, but it has stayed same, 8, 7, 7, 7, 6, and so on. Whereas India has been slowly but steadily going down. And this is easily reversible. However, I have my doubts about how much foreign exchange that India really have today. Don't think about the reserves. I really don't know that number, looking at the health of the banks.
Well, let me only say that if you free the Indian economy from the kind of regulation we are seeing, Indian mines themselves will generate surpluses. I was reading Gordon Brown's autobiography, and I was struck by two things. One is how the civil servants, after during an election and after an election, were actually helping the Conservative Party. Now, in my view, many of the civil servants who Modi is now trusting, who are basically people who are opposed to him and to his party, they were covertly, some overtly helping the other side and enabling them to cross over the finish line. The second point that I saw in Gordon Brown's book was how the bankers were obsessed with basically expensive money, cutting down consumption when you needed to pump in money and to basically increase consumption. That's what we need to do in India. But in India, the entire focus of the finance ministry is on taking as much of each citizen's rupee as can possibly be done. You have an absurd rate of 28% for GST. Well, we have an absurd structure for GST in any case, but 28% is totally absurd. Now, this is the attitude. No, it's not how many rupees can be made, how many rupees can be generated, but from the rupees already there, how much the government can grab. And this fundamental change in attitude needs to be made. I hope Modi will make it. I hope Prime Minister Modi will make it. I hope in this final 1 year of his term, he will go back to being the Modi that we all believed he would be in 2014.
And I concur with your view, and I really hope that Prime Minister Modi does become the one that he was when he was governing Gujarat. With those words, we would like to conclude our talk today. Professor Nalapat, thanks for taking the time out to talk to us.
Thank you, Sri. It's always a privilege to talk to you. Thank you.